Welcome to Carvin Software's instructional videos of Staffing Complete. This video will provide a general overview of the Users tab found within the Setup module. Start by navigating to the Setup module. The Setup module contains much of the foundation for Staffing Complete. Think of this module as the administration or the admin module. There should be a limited amount of people who have access to this module. If something is changed in this module, it has the potential to affect everything else in the database. Those with access to this module will set up permissions, check formats, taxes, calculations, control users, and make high-level changes. Keep in mind that many of the fields within the Setup module are for specific processes that shouldn't be changed or toggled without learning the functionality first. There are 11 tabs in the Setup module: Office, Users, Bank Account, Taxes and Deductions, Types, Formats, Checklist, Locality, Company, ACA, and Accrual Plans. Remember, all required fields on each tab are marked with an asterisk next to that field. The second main tab in the Setup module is the Users tab. The Users tab is where all software user logins, passwords, permissions, reports, and schedules are set for those accessing Staffing Complete. This is separate from the Remote Desktop Protocol, the RDP access, and is commonly referred to as the second login. Though the usernames and passwords typically match for the RDP login and the software login for ease of use, they're not required to and they do not sync in any way. There are two subtabs, the User Account and Roles tab. The User Account tab is where all individual users will be set up. If they need access to Staffing Complete, they will need to be set up on that tab. The Roles tab is where you can set up position-level permissions for ease of use in setting up users. We'll review more on this later. First, let's review the User tab and everything that you can assign a software user. The User Accounts tab will display basic information in the top grid regarding the software user's login information, home office, check limits, roles, and the last time the user logged in. This is a quick at-a-glance overview of all users entered into the database. There are 8 subtabs on the User Accounts tab: General, Modules, Permissions, Defaults, Reminders, Reports, Schedule, and Remote Access. The first General subtab displays user information for the user selected above. The username and password are used to log into Staffing Complete. This is also known as the second login, not to be confused with the first login, the remote desktop login. When creating a user for the first time, utilize the User Must Change Password at Next Logon checkbox. Set this field to a one-time password for the user to enter. They will then have to change their password before they can advance into the software. The full name field is the name that will display in the database when the user completes any action. The home office is their default office. If the box Enforce Home Office is checked on the Permissions tab Miscellaneous subtab, the user is restricted to only access items assigned to their home office. The time zone is important if using the schedule-related functionality within the software. You can also set a security code that will be required to be entered when cutting checks. You can assign a phone and email address for contact information. You can link a personnel in order to take advantage of the time clock functionality. And you can set the role for the user if applicable. To the right of the General tab are user-specific limits that can be set, such as limiting max check amounts for processing and texting limits. The next tab is the Modules tab. The Modules tab lists all of the modules that the user will have when they log in. Any checked box will mean that that module will load for the user. You must first assign the user the modules they are allowed to access before you can set the permissions for each module. Each module has its own set of permissions that can limit the user based on job necessity. Module permissions are set on the next tab, the Permissions tab. The Permissions tab houses multiple categories that apply to specific modules and processes. There are 9 subtabs for the following modules: Payroll, Invoicing, Customer, Personnel, Internal Payroll, AP, Banking, Setup, and Miscellaneous. With most permissions, you can hover over the item to see a description of what it modifies. By checking the box, it will grant the relevant permission. Items listed in red restrict rather than grant the ability to perform an action. On the Customer and Payroll tab, you will see a section to specify default permissions, read-only permissions, or hidden within that module. Permissions can be changed as often as needed, but the user will need to log out of Staffing Complete and log back in for the new changes to take effect. If you're unsure of the permission to set for a user, you can hover over most permissions to see additional details or contact support for training. In order to ensure permissions are set correct, we recommend creating a user with the permissions and modules you have in mind, log in as that user, and ensure the user can do what is needed. The Defaults tab is where you set up module-specific printer defaults. As this is set at the per-user level, the user will need to have the printers installed correctly locally and have the names match exactly to work correctly here. The Reminders tab allows you to view and modify the reminders for that specific user. You can right-click in the white space below to either add a reminder or remove a reminder. The Reports tab controls what reports the user can access. This is where you will add or remove the relevant reports for that user. Simply right-click and add all reports, or select Add to specify specific reports on the Report Lookup screen. The Report Lookup screen will display the name, category of the report, and if the report displays private internal personnel information, and a brief description of the report. The Schedule tab allows you to specify when the user is listed to work. If the permissions are restricted on the Permissions tab, Miscellaneous subtab, the schedule set here will restrict the user to only clocking in during the set schedule. The Remote Access tab will list all IP addresses and date timestamp to access Staffing Complete. You have the option to only allow certain pre-approved IP addresses. Check the box next to Only allow software access from the following whitelisted IP addresses and click the check mark next to the allowed addresses. Once checked, the check mark will turn green for all allowed addresses. The next sub-tab on the User tab is the Roles tab. The Roles tab is where you can set up position-based permissions to help ease the administration portion of user setups. This is extremely helpful when you have many users that have or need the same user profile setup. For example, if you have multiple payroll processors or customer service representatives, they typically all have the same permissions and access. You can create a payroll processor role or a customer service role and apply that to every relevant user. If you hire a new staff, simply insert the user, complete the General tab, and apply the desired role to the user. All modules and permission settings are complete. All roles already created will display in the grid and are assigned a color for easy visual distinction. The role must first be created here before it can be assigned to a user on the User Accounts subtab. If a module has a checkmark next to it under the Controlled by Role heading, the role's module permissions are modified on these tabs and will be grayed out under the User Accounts subtab. For more information regarding the Setup module, please visit our wiki at the address linked on the screen.